Greetings, Fire Chargers, Darkblade here, and in this video I will be reacting to Fables in the Quran. Muslim scholars admit the shocking truth by Act 17 Polem8cs. They have 139,000 subscribers, and about 100,000 more people watched this video. It has 10,000 likes, don't know how many dislikes, and they uploaded it on September 28th of last year. Now let's just get some background on who Act 17 Polem8cs is. They say, this is the official account for David Wood's Polem8cs videos. This channel is run by the designated team assigned to this Act 17 Polem8cs project. We don't just bring you the videos you've already loved watching on the former Act 17 Apologetics channel, which David Wood used to run before wiping it clean and giving it over to someone else. We also bring you new, never worth forcing videos created by the Dhu-l himself, uploaded by our team. If you liked Islamicizing me and Muhammad's Boom Boom Room, you'll love what's to come. If you didn't, maybe you need it all the more. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you more soon. And their tags are David Wood, Act 17 Apologetics, Act 17 Polem8cs, Islam, Muslims, Quran, Surah, Apologetics, and Polem8cs. Anyway, let's start with this video. Now, I have already seen this video before, and the first thing I want to say is that the thumbnail is a bit misleading. The person pictured here in the thumbnail, Shabir Ali, does not actually say this at any point in the video. So, let's get started.
You remember when Daddy used to tell you that story about the three little pigs and the big bad wolf?
Muslims believe that the Quran was revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, but...
That is correct. Oh, and by the way, since this video is only 10 minutes long, I won't be jumping it. I won't need to play David Wood on double speed. By the way, apparently the YouTube algorithm really liked the last time I reacted to David Wood, as that got over 900 views.
Many of Muhammad's contemporaries were convinced that he was copying earlier stories, some of which were fables, and passing them off as divine revelations. Interestingly,
yeah, the Quran itself also admits that this criticism against Muhammad's legitimacy was being raised.
14 centuries after Muhammad's critics repeatedly accused him of plagiarizing fables, Muslim scholars are starting to agree. Let's find out why. In Surah 18, we read about the sleepers of the cave, a group of people who supposedly went to sleep in a cave and woke up 300 years later. This fable goes back to people like Bishop Stephen of Ephesus around the middle of the 5th century. It was popular among the Christians of Arabia. They knew it wasn't true. They treated the story as a fable. But now it's in the...
Yeah, apparently I've heard that that original story also has some mathematical errors with the chronology that is used in it.
Quran, and more than 1 billion people believe that it really happened. According to Surah 19, Jesus began preaching as soon as he came out of Mary's womb. This story comes from the 6th century Arabic infancy gospel. The story of Satan refusing to bow down to Adam in Surah 15 comes from the 1st century Jewish apocryphal work, The Life of Adam and Eve. The story of a bird teaching Cain how to bury his brother in Surah 5 comes from Mishnah Sanhedrin. The tale of Solomon...
By the way, this is just some background. I think this would be what's considered the hook for this video.
And talking to animals in Surah 27 comes from the second Targum of the book of Esther. The legend of Mary giving birth under a palm tree in Surah 19 comes from an apocryphal work called The History of the Nativity of Mary and the Savior's Infancy, written in the early 600s. The account of Jesus giving life to clay birds in Surah 5 comes from a 2nd century work called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas.
Apparently, one of those, it was the original source of the story was written in the early 600s, so apparently it caught on quite quickly. By the way, I don't have time to check the original verses or chapters to ensure that these stories are actually in the cited Quran chapters, as that would probably make this video much longer. After all, yesterday, or technically earlier today, I posted a video that was a reaction to a 27-minute video. My total video ended up being an hour long.
One of the most conspicuous legends in the Quran is the story of Dhu-l-Qarnayn. In Surah 18, Allah says that Dhu-l-Qarnayn traveled west and found the place where the sun sets, traveled east and found the place where the sun rises, built a big wall to keep out the hordes of Gog and Magog. We know where this story comes from. It comes from what's called the Alexander Romance, collections of legends about Alexander the Great.
I've heard this before on another one of David Wood's videos. Basically, there was this very educated person who was part of, what was it? Radical Islamic terrorist organization, I think, and eventually he heard of an Aramaic story about Alexander the Great written in the Aramaic language that had some similarities to the Quran, and he wanted to know, did this Aramaic legend about Alexander the Great plagiarize this portion of the Quran? And eventually he looked into it, concluded that it was the other way around, and became an atheist. I think
there are Muslims
we'll get into it in this video.
Islam if you can get them to read the Alexander Romance and then show them what the Quran says about Dhu-l-Qarnayn.
Oh, he's definitely
Musa Sarantonio, for instance, was an ISIS recruiter. While he was in prison, he read the legends about Alexander the Great, and he noticed the parallels with Dhu-l-Qarnayn in the Quran.
7.5 minutes, though.
Musa tells us in an interview with The Atlantic.
Okay.
Realizing that Dhu-l-Qarnayn was not at all a real person, but was rather based on a fictional account of Alexander the Great, instantly left me with only one possible conclusion. The Quran was not divinely inspired, he wrote.
I mean, I am not a Muslim. I would agree with the conclusion that the Quran is not divinely inspired, but I think that reaching it, the supposed evidence does not actually lead to the conclusion. It could just be that this story was part of the cultural milieu, and that the Quran author used it to tell a story with and teach some ideas. Not that the author believed that this story about Alexander the Great to have actually happened.
It had taken Alexander the Great fan fiction as fact. Of course, I would have preferred to have discovered all that 17 years ago and avoided much trouble. He has therefore abandoned not only ISIS, but Islam and religion as a whole. He is an atheist and admires the God Delusion author Richard Dawkins.
If he's admiring Richard Dawkins, then he's probably gone too far.
So, some Muslims react to legends in the Quran by concluding that the Quran is not from God. But other Muslims have a different reaction. Muslim scholars like Shabir Ali believe that it's perfectly acceptable for the Quran to use fables to teach lessons, just as we, in our time, can discuss what happened in a Marvel film without believing that we're discussing real events.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It is true that some things that the Quran says are not going to be suitable to Christians because they don't find those in their Gospels, and they think that these come from apocryphal sources. Why should we trust that? But
it's not just that we think these stories come from apocryphal sources, is that they actually do.
Explain that you've heard me, so there's no need to repeat, but because David has raised the question again, the point is this: the Quran is referring to...
Wait, did he just say David? So is this guy, like, talking about something that involves David Wood?
What people already know. It's like if we say to you, remember how this Hulk guy was when he was a human, he went around shopping for a stretchable underwear, and knowing obviously he'll need that when the moment occurs. So then somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about will think we're referring to actual persons, but you know that we're referring to a person in a movie or in a Marvel Comics description.
What film or comic does that
And
actually
in a
happen
similar way, when the Quran is talking about Jesus in a particular way, it could be something based on history, it could be something based on the previous literature. It's calling the attention of the people to the story and drawing out the Quranic lessons.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate response.
Did you just catch Shabir comparing?
Oh, look. David Wood is actually in this clip.
Stories in the Quran about people like Jesus and so on too. Maybe it's just talking about, as you and I would talk about, the Hulk or something like that, Marvel heroes. Well, if that's the case, then when the Quran tells us that the Jews thought they killed him, but they killed him not, nor crucified him, maybe this is just a kind of comic book story that we're not supposed to take seriously.
Muhammad Asad held a similar view of the legends we find in the Quran. In Asad's commentary on his translation of the Quran, we read numerous passages declaring, "It should always be remembered that all Quranic references to historical or legendary events, whether described in the Bible or in the oral tradition of pre-Islamic Arabia, are invariably meant to elucidate a particular lesson in ethics and not to narrate a story as such."
I think that's a fair point.
This explains the fragmentary character of these references and allusions. Regarding the legend of the sleepers of the cave, Asad writes, "But whatever the source of this legend, and irrespective of whether it is of Jewish or Christian origin, the fact remains that it is used in the Quran in a purely parabolic sense, namely as an illustration of God's power to bring about death or sleep and resurrection or awakening, and secondly, as an allegory of the piety that induces men to abandon a wicked or frivolous world in order to keep their faith unsullied, and of God's recognition of that faith by his bestowal of a spiritual awakening which transcends time and death."
Okay.
In response to legends about Solomon in the Quran, Asad says, "In this, as well as in several other passages relating to Solomon, the Quran alludes to the many poetic legends which were associated with his name since early antiquity and had become part and parcel of Judeo-Christian and Arabian lore long before the advent of Islam. Although it is undoubtedly possible to interpret such passages in a rationalistic manner,
what does that mean?
I do not think that this is really necessary. Because they were so deeply ingrained in the imagination of the people to whom the Quran addressed itself in the first instance, these legendary accounts of Solomon's wisdom and magic powers had acquired a cultural reality of their own and were, therefore, eminently suited to serve as a medium for the parabolic exposition of certain ethical truths with which this book is concerned. And so, without denying or confirming their mythical character, the Quran uses them as a foil for the idea that God is the ultimate source of all human power and glory, and that all achievements of human ingenuity, even though they may sometimes border on the miraculous, are but an expression of his transcendental creativity."
I think that's generally accurate. It's taking, like, this, here's a story that you already know, and here's what can be gained or learned from this story. Though in some instances, like with the people sleeping in a cave, the story has some adaptations not present in the original source. I don't remember what they were. Apostate Prophet has a video on this.
What I find most interesting when Muslim scholars admit that the Quran is filled with myths, fables, and legends is that this is exactly what the people around Muhammad said when he started delivering these revelations. Muhammad's contemporaries recognized these stories in the Quran as myths, fables, and legends, even according to the Quran. Surah 6, verse 25. "When they come to thee to dispute with thee, the infidels say, 'Verily, this is nothing but fables of the ancients.'"
Some among them hear, hearken unto thee. I think that would mean something like hear or pay attention to you. but we have cast veils over their hearts so that they should not understand the Quran, and a weight into their ears. And though they should see all kinds of signs, they will refuse faith in them, and until when they come to you to argue with you, the infidels say, merely, this is nothing but fables.
Surah 8, verse 31. And when our signs were being recited to them, they said, we have already heard. If we wished, we could say the like of this. This is not but the fairy tales of the ancients. Surah 25, verses 4 to 5. Those who disbelieve say, this is not but a lie that he hath invented, and other folk have helped him with it, so that they have produced a slander and a lie. And they say, fables of the men of old, which he hath had written down, so that they are dictated to him, morn and evening. Surah 68, verse 15. When our signs are recited to him, he says...
Oh, and by the way, the word signs in this verse means parts of the Quran, just so you know.
Fairy tales of the ancients. Surah 83, verse 13. Who, when thou readest unto him our revelations, saith, mere fables of the men of old. So, when Muhammad delivered his revelations about the sleepers of the cave or about Dhu-l-Qarnayn, the people around him kept saying, we've heard these stories before. We know where these stories come from. These are fables. They're fairy tales. They're bedtime stories.
That thing is,
and
what
Muslim
you just said
scholars
here is
are
kind of
finally
humorous.
starting to agree. Sometimes your first impression is the correct one.
Yeah, but I think they're reading too much into this. Some of the responses to this argument of basically copying folk tales. It's like the purpose of this is like these people already know these folk tales. So these folk tales are used to teach them certain lessons, and you've already heard that several times in this video and in Wood's original video. So that is all for this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to me, and I will see you tomorrow, unless of course I want to put out another video later today. Whether I upload one today or tomorrow, it'll be a reaction to something by The Beat by Alan Parr, who I am subscribed to. Anyway, Darkblade out.